Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. And this is Emily McGee. I'm the Director of Communications at HPBA. And if we can look at the next slide, I will do a quick overview of the webinar guidelines today. And the first thing is that this is about NSPS. We'll answer all your questions about what's been going on. You can submit your questions through the chat function in Zoom, and we will answer as many as we can. All attendees are muted for this webinar. To submit a question, obviously click on the chat icon on the bottom of your screen. And a recording of this webinar will be available on the HPBA website within 24 hours. And with that, I will turn this over to Ryan Carroll to take us from there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emily. Hey, guys, this is Ryan Carroll. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Hearth Patio and Barbecue Association. Just quickly, I'll mention from the previous slide, topics to be covered today: history and background of NSPS 2015 to present, coronavirus sell-through relief efforts, options remaining for step 1 products as May 15 approaches. What can you do after May 15th is coming on, and then ample time for questions and answers. So with that, move us on to the next slide. I'm going to be serving as the moderator today. The bulk of the presentation, I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of John Crouch, our Director of Public Affairs, who many of you have worked with for years, and Rachel Feinstein, our Senior Manager of Government Affairs, who has been around in the industry as long as I have now. So you've worked with all three of us for quite a while. For those of you that we haven't interacted with, we welcome you and look forward to providing you this update. We'll get underway shortly here, but we also have the privilege to have one of our solid fuel hearth appliance section co-chairs on the line. It's one of our industry manufacturers from Blaze King. We have Chris Neufeld joining us, and I'd like to welcome Chris to have a few introductory words if he so chooses.
Thank you, Ryan. First off, I hope everybody that's tuning in today is doing well. This whole NSPS thing has been a long time coming. The entire process actually began in November of 2009. And basically, here we are a little over a decade later dealing with the ramifications of the rule that came out in 2015. Ryan, I'd like to thank you and your staff for all the hard work and effort that you've done on behalf of us as a manufacturer and the retailers that are out there in the United States and Canada that have stood by you and listened to you and read the emails and all the alerts. HPBA's focus to keep us all informed has prevented what was a cataclysmic failure of so many different businesses, manufacturers and retailers alike, back in the mid-1980s. I believe it was 88 with the very first new NSPS. So I know that HPBA has done a very good job of putting out documents and emails, especially post-March of 2018. What you did at Expo was fantastic, and all the information you've been given out since then. So I'm eager to see how this webinar goes forward from here, and I'll turn it back over to you. And again, thank you all very much, and please, everybody, stay well.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. We appreciate it. Yeah, it has been a process for sure, and that actually coincidentally ties in with our first set of slides here. I'm going to turn this over to John Crouch, and he's going to run through some of the history and background of NSPS advocacy 2015 to present. It's been a smooth process at times and decidedly unsmooth at others, but that's the way it is when you deal with federal government. And so I'll let John take over and start getting you guys going on the presentation. Thanks, John.
All right, thanks, Ryan. As Chris said, we've spent a lot of time on this, but the really relevant portion began in 2014 when the EPA submitted the proposal. HPBA filed extensive comments. There were 22 megabytes of comments and supporting documentation. We urged EPA, amongst other things, to provide sell-through past May 15. EPA went final with the rule in May of 2015, and they did not provide sell-through past May 15th, 2020. They claimed that the 5 years of step 1 was the sell-through and all the sell-through we were going to get. So we immediately challenged them in court on this issue and a number of others. However, EPA's made clear that they were prepared to fight us on sell-through. Then, after our continued advocacy for 3 years, in December of 2018, we almost got a bill through Congress giving us sell-through. And we came very close, and many of you helped with that. And Rachel was spending night and day on that issue. We got it through the United States House of Representatives and almost made it through the Senate, and were thwarted by the government shutdown. So then we continued our negotiation with EPA through 2018. In November of 2018, finally, EPA proposed sell-through. They offered it on warm air furnaces specifically, and said they would take comments on the possibility of sell-through for wood stoves. We submitted extensive comments. Some of our members did as well. And EPA finalized it in March and April, and did not grant sell-through at that time. Next.
There we go.
There we go. So in mid-March, since Expo, basically, we have continued to hammer EPA on the need for sell-through, particularly now in the light of the virus and the mitigation efforts, and the fact that even if a store was allowed to stay open as a heating business, people weren't walking in the door. People weren't paying attention to anything. They weren't buying cars. They weren't buying anything except groceries and masks, and we don't sell either of those. So Rachel collected stories from 180 retailers, many of whom are probably on this call, and she sent a letter to the congressional leaders and EPA, and that had some impact. For several weeks, we thought there was a possibility of what's called a direct final rule, which might have provided sell-through until July 15th. And we really thought that that was what EPA was preparing. We now know that that is no longer the case. We expect a proposed rulemaking, proposing sell-through, to be published possibly tomorrow. It will propose sell-through for this fall, and EPA will then take comments for 60 days. Sell-through will be, in abeyance until the possibility of them going final. So much of what we're going to talk about on this webinar has to do with the fact that there could be sell-through this fall, but we're not certain. Sorry, Rachel, I see you were supposed to do that.
That's all right. No problem at all. You covered it very well, and just want to reiterate the thanks to those 180 some retailers who provided us with their feedback on very short notice on how the coronavirus mitigation efforts had impacted any end of season sales and how many stoves they had left. That really, obviously, it had a big impact on the agency, enough for them to put together a proposal. But again, as John mentioned, this is a proposal, it's not a final rule. So there is a possibility that it might not come into effect when it comes time to finalize the proposal in the coming months. But there is that small hope there. Anything else you want to cover on that, John?
No, I think not.
Okay. And this is to you again.
So retailers have a dilemma. Well, first of all, HPBA has said from the get-go, we hope you are all able to sell your remaining step 1 stoves. And don't forget, it doesn't have to be delivered. It doesn't have to be installed. It can be in your back room. It just needs to have some type of reasonable deposit on it. I know that some of you have been promoting stoves the last month in spite of the virus, and some of them have been selling. Also, you have an option. If you have just 1 or 2 left, you might want to contact your local nonprofits. For instance, you know, a weatherization program, or a community action agency that helps low-income families, you do need them to agree to take the stove before May 15th. They don't need to take it. It can stay in your back room, just as the example we used. If you have a deposit and can label that stove as sold to a customer, same thing with a donation. If you can label it as donated to the local community action agency, you're covered. And then you'll have to work with them, obviously, to help them get it installed this fall. But if you want to offload a number of products, we did set up a donation program. Let's go back one more, maybe, Rachel. And we call it Stoves to Homes. It was suggested actually by one of our members, Shannon Good, which we appreciate very much. And we have found a few nonprofits that have experience changing out stoves. And we'll go to the form, but in just a minute. And we've created a form whereby you can say, all right, I'll donate this model, serial number X, serial number, the second stove, serial number Y, third stove, serial number Z, and simply send that in, and the nonprofit can acknowledge the donation in time, and then you're covered. You can't ever sell that stove. You have to be true to your donation, but you're done with it. It's over. You don't have to worry about it. So the difficulty that retailers have to deal with, and we're sorry, we didn't set it up this way. This is the way it's evolved. There might be a sell-through period this fall. If you want to risk that and hang on to the stoves, you might be able to sell them this fall. But if you can't, they are boat anchors. They're illegal to sell, and they will be illegal to show or sell between now and sell through if it were granted. Or if you just want to be done with it, there's the donation option, either locally or regionally. So Rachel, let's show them the form. On our website is a simple form that acknowledges that you're donating this. You can set your own value to it. So you can capture reasonable value. You'll have to defend that if the IRS ever asks you to show its reasonable value. But you can capture your original freight in, the wholesale cost of the stove. If it's a display model and you have to get a pallet and strap it down and wrap it and expense some time and money on that, you can capture that as your donation. And then you fill out this form with serial number, pick one of the nonprofits, and then pick a backup nonprofit. You can see that there's two lists here. Pick up a backup nonprofit, and you'll be able to send that in to us. We'll forward it to the nonprofit. They'll send you an email acknowledging this form, and you can put this form on the box, and you're safe. The one additional thing you'll have to do is later, when the nonprofit is ready for the stove, and that will, given the virus, that may be months before they're ready for the stove. You'll be responsible for getting it to them. Now, HPBA will do our best effort to batch stoves together. If we have 3 dealers in Virginia that have all sending stoves to ASP in Eastern Tennessee, we'll work together to try and keep those shipping costs down as much as we can. But at the end of the day, you'll have a second donation of your cost to ship them. The nonprofits do not have money to pay freight. I think next one, Rachel.
We covered a little bit already, and I just
covered it.
Yep, and John, also, we want to emphasize that with these organizations that we're partnering with, at this time, for the most part, they're only accepting freestanding wood stoves.
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent point. These nonprofits, some of them are tribes in the West. Others are low income. They're really not set up to do inserts or to do pellet stoves. We've had a couple of inquiries or warm air furnaces about that specifically. We're dealing those with a one-on-one basis, but principally this is for freestanding wood stoves. One of the weaknesses that those of you in New England will spot right away is that we do not have a location in New England yet. We're still in negotiation with one. I thought we had 2 different times. I thought we had an option and it fell through. But for everyone else in the West, in the South, in the Midwest, we've got you covered. Minnesota, Tennessee, Arizona, Idaho, and Alaska. So there are options for everybody. And again, we've focused on nonprofits that know how to install and change out wood stoves. If you want to find your own local nonprofit, you're certainly free to do that. We caution you, though, that some of the nonprofits, the local Habitat for Humanities are fairly famous for this, fund themselves by taking donated building materials and then selling them out of their thrift store. And of course, the stoves will be illegal to sell, illegal for a nonprofit to sell on Monday. And plus, who would want to take something out of your back room and have essentially give it to a nonprofit and have them sell it in your market? One of the points of these regional donations is get these stoves out of your market and get them to people who are so low income that they'll never be buying a stove from our local people or anyone else. Next slide.
So one thing I want to highlight with the group here is to go to our website and really review our NSPS toolkit. This has been a resource on our website for maybe even a couple years now, at least a year. And it has a lot of resources on there, including an enforcement visit checklist, what to do if an enforcement officer from EPA, the state agency, or a local authority come to visit. We have a checklist for what to do, who to call, a rumors and fact sheet, frequently asked questions, and a labeling guide. What does a step 2 label look like? What to look for? So you can navigate to that shortened link to make it easier, bit.ly/NSPS, all caps, toolkit, capital T, all one word, and you'll be able to access those resources. And there's also a link at the top of the toolkit page to the stove donation as well. And the URL for the stove donation program, for those of you who have just dialed in, is hpba.org/stoves to homes initiative, all lowercase. So what comes into effect on May 15th? I'll turn it back to John.
All right, thanks, Rachel. So we hope everyone's aware by now, the new emission limits go into effect on the 15th. And there are a couple of key differences that we hope everyone has paid attention to before they actually are visited by an enforcement person. The most important one seems to be that the operations manual must be readily accessible to the unit in the store. I know if you leave the owner's manual or the operation manual in the unit, consumers will sometimes take it away. You need to find a way to thwart that. Many retailers are making a photocopy of it and keeping that copy perhaps taped to the back of the stove or just readily accessible. But the EPA enforcement person has been enforcing on this issue. Another key thing is that consumers will increasingly ask you questions about efficiency and carbon monoxide values, because those values are now made public. They are tested consistently between stoves. They're not mandatory, but they are public. And one of the ways the public is going to find them is on the EPA's database. Next slide. Thank you. But first, one thing that is no longer necessary now. Some step 2 stoves that got certified during this first period have been able to have a voluntary hang tag from the EPA Burnwise program. Beginning Monday, the voluntary hang tag is no longer a requirement because everything's step 2. The point of the hang tag was to help consumers differentiate between step 1 and step 2. But now, of course, on Monday, everything will be step 2, so it will no longer be necessary. Next.
Yep, and just to clarify, Monday is the next business day after the 15th, but the effective date is May 15th, this Friday.
Yes. So any unit that isn't certified for 2020, that is not step 2, cannot be manufactured, sold, or transferred after May 15th. That's why it's important for you to decide now if you're going to donate the stove or if you're going to find a way to sell it to someone. If you decide that you're going to wait until the fall and hope that there is sell-through, you need to remove these stoves from your sales floor. They cannot even appear to be offered for sale. Now, we want to emphasize again that all step 2 stoves have their efficiency revealed. So for several years, we've been warning at the affiliate meetings that retail salespeople need to be able to explain efficiency to consumers. And they need to be able to explain the carbon monoxide numbers. Sometimes the carbon monoxide numbers track with particulates, i.e. something that's low in particulates is low in CO, but not always. And your salespeople will need to work with your manufacturer's sales reps to understand those nuances and be ready to explain those. Next. There are 2 publicly facing databases. EPA will, we think, update them soon. Right now, of course, today they have the step 1 products on there. After, hopefully soon, if not next week, they will only have step 2. One is for wood heaters, which is both wood stoves and pellet stoves. And one is for central heaters, wood warm air furnaces and hydronic heaters. We know specifically that even the current databases today are not up to date. So if a manufacturer says to you, we have a certificate and it's not on the database yet, if the manufacturer will not tell you they have a certificate until they do, and if you wish, you can ask for a photocopy of it, I'm sure. But there will be some disparity. We've already run into this where you have a certified stove in your store and it's not on their database because they haven't kept it up to date. They are doing better, and we did complain about that, and we believe that they have gotten more help on this issue. Next. Just real quickly, this is what the database looks like. I hope most of you have taken a look at it and played with it. It's going to be a much smaller database for both wood stoves and the other one for central heaters after next week. And sometimes the best way to find it, we had a little box there up in the upper right. I always find it just by Googling EPA wood stove database rather than going in through the EPA's website. Next.
Great, thanks, John. So before we wanted to make sure that we left enough time at the end of our webinar here for questions, because we're expecting there to be quite a few questions. While I go through some of these frequently asked questions that we've gotten over the past months and years even, be sure to type into the chat box any questions that you might have or thought of during the presentation. And if we don't answer them in these next 3 slides, then we will address those in the Q&A section to follow. So starting off, this is a question we've gotten very often. If I sell a step 1 product before May 15th, 2020, but can't install it until after the effective date, is that okay? Yes, that is okay. The rule defines sale as the transfer of ownership or control, not transfer of ownership and control. So that could mean a a sales receipt, if someone's paid a deposit or they've signed paperwork saying, yes, I'm purchasing this, and making a commitment to buy, some kind of showing that the ownership has transferred to the end user. And that's important. It must be a transfer of ownership or control to the end user consumer, not to a middleman like a contractor or distributor. So the consumer end user must take ownership or control of the product before May 15th. So we've gotten some questions in the past month or so about customers who have delayed or tried to cancel an installation of a step one product due to the coronavirus impact on them and the community, and people being worried about not being able to install the product after May 15th because of this effective date and wanting to cancel their order. You can tell your customers and reassure them that you still will be able to install the product, that they shouldn't cancel the order. They've made the commitment. Ownership has been transferred, final sale. And to schedule an install later on is perfectly acceptable and in line with the law. So next question we've gotten: if I burn a stove in my store to provide heat or as a display, does that count as used? And no, it doesn't. You can still use the stove or heater of another kind to heat your store. You just never will be able to sell it or give it away, because you can't transfer ownership or control of a non-step 2 appliance after May 15th. So if it's heating your store, be sure to put a sign next to the heater that reads "stored heater, not for sale," just to really make it clear that this is not a display, it's a heater for the store. Since you're a commercial owner, even though you are using that heater, like it's in our minds, yes, it's used, it's being used to heat. You are a commercial owner, and only non-commercial owners' used stoves count as truly used to EPA. And a commercial owner is any person who owns or controls a wood heater in the course of the business of the manufacture, importation, distribution, including shipping and storage, or sale of the wood heater. So you are considered a commercial owner, even if you, say, took the stove, the step 1 stove from your store, put it in your garage, and tried to sell it personally or as an individual. You still could not do that, because you're considered a commercial owner who is in the business of the manufacture, importation, distribution, or sale of wood heaters. So again, there's the answer to that on this slide. Can I take the step 1 products from my store to my home and sell them out of my garage as a private owner? No. And if this is still illegal, you cannot do this. So again, you're considered a commercial owner. We've also gotten the question, and I don't think it's on one of these slides here, but we've gotten the question: if one of my customers sells a used stove to me, like that they've owned and they've been using, and they give it to me on consignment and they've asked me to sell it for them, can I do that? Yes, you can, because it was used by a non-commercial owner. There's a clear chain of ownership from non-commercial owner to you. We've also been asked the question: say someone wants to get a new stove, they currently have a non-step 2 stove, and they want to buy a new stove from me and sell the one they currently have, and I sell it on consignment on their behalf and put the money earned from the sale towards purchasing their new stove. You can do that too, because again, that used stove that they're selling to you to contribute towards paying for a new stove, that still was owned by a non-commercial owner, and again has a clear chain of ownership from them to you. Just be sure to document that transfer from the non-commercial owner to yourself, commercial owner, showing where the product came from, what date it was transferred or sold to you. Always important to document that. So now what? So John, I'll turn it back to you just to add on to anything you'd like and to round out this slide.
Thanks, Rachel. As it says on the slide, if you want to donate, there's the URL for Stoves to Home initiative. If you want to, we have nonprofits standing by to accept your freestanding wood stove donations. The donation acknowledgement must happen before May 15th. So if you have been thinking about this, and I hope you have, we originally talked about Stoves to Homes in February to our membership. If you've been thinking about this and want to donate, then please act now, this afternoon. Go to the website, fill out the online form, pick who you're prepared to send it to, and you're done. On the slide, it says, do not count on sell-through. In the last 24 hours, we've learned that EPA, some people at EPA think that even though they're just proposing sell-through, that there will be sell-through this fall. I think I can speak on behalf of our entire staff and our legal counsel to say that our experience with EPA proposals to date has not been satisfactory. You're welcome to make a decision to try and tough it out to the fall, but personally, I would not count on sell-through if I owned a retail store.
And then, John, the question that I'm sure is on people's minds who are considering hanging on to step one products for a potential sell-through some months from now, what do they do between May 15th and whenever, if ever, that sell-through occurs?
Yes, they're going to have to remove those stoves, store them away. You do not want a state inspector or the EPA inspector to walk through your warehouse and find them just inside the back door. Say, wait a minute, you're not supposed to, you can't have this. You're not, how could you have this here and not be offering it for sale? And that would put the burden on you to say, oh, I'm not offering it for sale. I'm just holding it in case there is sell-through. So at a minimum, you would need to store those stoves far away, preferably not even on site.
Yep. And then on the flip side, when it comes to the Stoves to Homes initiative donation program, what the process there will be, you make the donation form commitment, the nonprofit responds acknowledging the donation, saying whether they'll accept the donation or not, and then you hang on to those stoves at your store or wherever you like, but you would attach the donation form and email from the nonprofit acknowledging that they are taking ownership of those stoves, and put a sign on the stoves that say not for sale or sold or something indicating along with that donation form and email acknowledgement. Those can stay in the back room in your warehouse, not on the showroom floor, but they can remain on site in a storage area until the nonprofit is ready to receive those at a later date. So that brings us to our Q&A section, giving us a full 25 minutes to answer questions. So Ryan, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Excellent job. We have been getting some questions, and it looks like you guys anticipated a few of those, but there were some clarification issues here that really fall into two categories. One is more or less what happens as of May 15th, and then another set of questions about the nonprofit donation options. So I'll probably take these to the extent I can in that order. We have a question reading, if a stove is clearly labeled display, not for sale, that a manufacturer has created that label, can that remain on the show floor?
Can I take this, Rachel?
Yes.
We are aware that at least one manufacturer has told their dealers that that manufacturer is prepared to support that idea. We are also aware that other manufacturers have taken a different approach. It is entirely up to the manufacturer and their dealers.
Yep. And just know, if you keep that display, and you will never be able to sell it, you will never be able to even give it away. It will become trash or recycling material. You will never be able to to sell or give that away.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, so this is John. What I would always be concerned about is that some employee of mine would be tempted if someone said, well, what if I gave you a real good deal on price on that? Would you take it out of the wall? I know it's built in. Would you take it out and sell it to me? And that employee might say, sure, and that might be a state or federal inspector. The federal inspector tends to be very highly identified. He wears a little hat that says US EPA, but we're not clear about the states. For all we know, some of the state people will try and be incognito. So if you leave the product on display, as Rachel said, you understand it will never be sold or transferred. It is yours for life.
Great, thank you guys. What about the sale of antique cook stoves or potbelly stoves?
Those are used stoves and they have never been covered by the NSPS. The NSPS is a new source performance standard. As long as the stove has been legitimately used, and of course anything that's antique is probably well used, it'd be wise to be able to document it. I think if you refurbish antique stoves, I know there are several companies that do that. It's always wise, if asked, to be able to say who you got the stove from. If it's a brand new, out of the box potbelly stove, that's a different matter. That is not legal unless it is certified as a step 2 stove to offer for sale after the 15th.
Yep, and cook stoves are not covered by the NSPS.
Thanks, that's right.
All right, staying on kind of the same topic here. Does the sale of step 1 units need to happen by Thursday night or Friday night?
I believe it's Thursday night because Friday is the effective date. May 15th is the effective date of step 2. So 11:59 p.m. Thursday, pick your time zone, is the end of step 1.
And I would add, nobody knows what constitutes a sale. It's hard to imagine that EPA would accept a $1 deposit as constituting a sale, but you certainly don't have to have half down. Just get some kind of legitimate deposit. And
Yeah,
you call
when it comes to, just to clarify, for John's talking about what is considered transfer of ownership.
right, a sale.
A sale, yes.
Right.
They don't define how, like, oh, you need to pay up to $100 down payment in order for ownership to be transferred. They don't specify that. They just say transfer of ownership or control. So if you have an invoice or a paperwork showing that the transfer of ownership has occurred, that only that needs to occur before May 15th.
All right, switching gears a little bit to more questions more related to the donation options here. What about taking care of warranty issues in donated stoves? Do you have to? What are we obligated to do?
Yes, that has come up from the nonprofits already. The warranties, of course, are the responsibility of the manufacturers. The dealer will not have any long-term responsibility for warranty. But they will have a responsibility, again, to get the stove to the nonprofit. The warranty from the manufacturer will apply.
All right. Excuse me. If the stove is given to a nonprofit, can the nonprofit raffle it off, sell it at auction? Can the nonprofit, like a scout camp, keep and use the stove?
We believe they can keep and use the stove. And we have one nonprofit that we're fairly certain will have to give them to other nonprofits. But to actually raffle it would, I suspect EPA would view that as a sale. And that would be between the nonprofit and EPA.
Yeah, and John, this kind of reminds me of the question we've gotten about Habitat for Humanity and Restore. Someone phrased a question to me earlier this week. If they donated a step 1 stove to Habitat for Humanity and then Habitat put it in their Restore to sell and further help their cause by benefiting from the sale of that step one product, that cannot happen. I think we even asked EPA about this, and they said no, they cannot be resold.
Right. So you can see how a raffle would dance right into that category. That's why I think a nonprofit use it themselves, like at a scout camp. You bet. Yes.
All right, back to a sale before the end of this week. Can the deposit be cash as long as it's notated on an invoice, or does it have to be a credit card transaction in terms of?
I don't think EPA cares.
Yep, any payment, any legal tender.
All right. What if a manufacturer does not agree to honor the warranty of a unit donated to the nonprofit?
Well, that will be for HPBA to follow up on. Because I can't, the manufacturers warranty these products to their first user. And of course, these will be new stoves. And so the nonprofit will put them in the home of the first user. If you have any questions about that, why don't we just invite people to contact me directly?
All right. Question about exports by May 15th. Can retailers still sell to Canadian provinces that allow step one?
EPA does not forbid export. Export is not easy. Certainly, any of you who have ever shipped anything to Canada know that you'll have to have a broker. And there are certainly some provinces where step two is required. So you'll need to be real clear about what you're doing. But the new source performance standard does not prohibit that.
All right, kind of a back to the previous question a little bit. Can it be defined as a transfer of ownership if we have a deposit but don't deliver it or invoice it? I think the delivery part is relatively clear, but what about no invoice on that?
Yeah, I don't understand the question, because every store I've been around, including the one I ran for a couple of years, you have some kind of receipt that you give someone when they give you a deposit. All you need is a copy of that receipt showing that you have a deposit, that it's not just your word, that you actually have you gave someone a receipt for a deposit and put it on the box.
Could you sell a unit to a family member who is not part of the business for them to hold on consignment?
You know, anyone who's trying to dance around this regulation has to understand that they are potentially in violation of a federal statute. And it's just not worth it. Because if you get caught, even if the state inspector caught you and then turned you over to the federal people, it's just not worth it. You are a commercial entity, and you would be in a situation where you might have to prove in court that your family member was not related to you or was not related to you as a business. And I don't think HPBA would urge you to not do that.
Yep, and to add to that, John, you can't just sell a product to a family member and they hang on to it and then you sell it as used later. The product does have to be installed and used for a period of time, truly used. And again, justifying it to a judge, you need to keep that in mind as well.
All right. One we've always struggled with to provide a real definitive answer to, but what is the fine if you are caught selling a prohibited stove?
I can take this, John. Oh, and also to add to the previous answer to the last question, the judicial system almost always defers to the agency, to EPA. If EPA says you did wrong, the courts almost always defer to the EPA decision, to their assessment. So to the question, Ryan, would you mind repeating that real quick? the fine. What was the fine?
Yep, that's it.
So it's a little hazy here because the EPA guidance on Clean Air Act violations and fines is, I think it's from 1992. So it's not adjusted for inflation, but it could be, and this is not a minimum or a maximum, but it could be $5,000 per infraction per day. It could be more than that. It could be less. EPA tends to adjust that number up and down based on the size of the violation, how much they want to make an example of you. You really don't want to deal with a potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars worth fine. I know of one, I believe, John, in the Northwest, was that a retailer or a
No,
distributor?
no, it was a distributor.
Yep. There was a distributor, I think it was a couple of years ago. They were notified by EPA that they had sold 6 non-step 1 stoves, and that distributor did make an effort to try to recall those stoves. They were able to retrieve 5 of the 6, and they were fined, I think it was something like a little over $6,500. So they at least made a good faith effort to try to retrieve those stoves. Couldn't get one, but they still got a fine. And in these days, with the financial hardship a lot of businesses are facing, you really don't want to add another nail to the I don't want to say coffin, but you don't want an extra burden on your business right now.
Yeah, let me add just one little bit of flavor to that, Rachel. The Clean Air Act fines are designed for big companies. And the fines related to the new source performance standards. All the other new source performance standards are for big companies. They're for electric generating units and asphalt batch plants and things like that. So EPA would customize the fine, but it would be per unit per day. You could count on that, and it could be quite substantial.
And John, in terms of NSPS as it applies to those industries, I think the fine is something like up to $24,000 per day per violation. And so that's, we would obviously say that's a bit outsized for our industry, but they can still be very significant. It's just we don't have a precise dollar amount for anybody to weigh
That's
into
right.
that cost benefit analysis there. What is the tax benefit for a donation? And a related question that I had seen earlier is, could you go over the what you mentioned earlier about pricing or valuing? I'm sorry, the donation.
I can take the tax benefit question, John, if you take the other part of
Okay.
it. So the tax part of that question, so HPBA, we are not accountants. We aren't your accountants. And it's difficult for us to answer that question, what is the tax benefit, without seeing your books. And we've asked CPAs this question as well. And generally speaking, the idea is you can claim a deduction for a charitable contribution, an in-kind charitable donation, on your, depending on what kind of business you are, whether you're an S Corp or a C Corp or LLC, it really depends on your company's individual business designation, on whether you would file that deduction claim on your business or even your personal tax return. It really depends on your individual situation. But it is, all of these organizations we've partnered with are 501c3s. They're all registered with the IRS as being eligible to receive charitable donations. You just need to determine on your end how and what you file, and work with your accountant or whoever you use for your business tax expenses.
And if you're ever audited, you need to be able to identify that your deduction was a function of your actual costs. Now, they can be all your costs, but the nonprofits will not set the value. You set the value. So if you say that a stove was one stove was a $10,000 donation, and you're prepared to defend that in an audit, great, that's your choice. my guess is you'll want to look at what you actually paid for the stove, what you approximate freight in, and any costs you might have, again, if you have to box the stove up. Later, when you help get the stove to the nonprofit, you'll have a separate deduction for that. But there's no way to know yet at this point what that'll be. And it may be months, it may even be next year before the nonprofit really needs the stove.
Yep. And on our donation form, we do ask you to enter the fair market value of the products that you're donating. And we ask that mostly for you to have on your donation form the value listed, so you have that for your tax records later on. But also some of the nonprofits are interested in that information. We've been told they're interested for like when they do their reports later on, like saying the amount, like, oh, we've received, $20,000 worth of in-kind donations this quarter or something along those lines. So some of them are interested in that information. You will not receive questions from them about, oh, are you sure it's really worth this much? They won't be asking you things like that when you submit your donation form. They're not going to question that number.
That's right.
All right. Say someone is looking, I'm not sure if these are from the same submitter or not, but they look to be related. Somebody wants to recycle these appliances, has a question about keeping those units in their warehouse, tagging them, labeling them as not for sale to be brought to a recycler, but something I think we're all cognizant of here. What if your employees are laid off and you don't have anybody to remove them from your warehouse on that date? The fact patterns are endless here, and that's I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Is that one question or two? I guess I'm confused.
It was two. Recycling
Okay.
was related. So the initial question was, can I keep the units in my warehouse and tag them, saying not for sale to be brought to a recycler? And the second one was, what if you're physically unable to carry through on your word there?
Well, again, the issue will be if a state or federal inspector walks through your door. So first of all, that means that any stay-at-home orders have to be lifted by then. And they're being changed by individual states, so we can't really predict how that would work. But we've been advised by at least one state that they potentially could start enforcement on Monday if their people are allowed by their governor to go out.
And I think it's within reason. Like if you have a sign on those products saying like not for sale to be recycled, it's clear that they're not for sale and what they're worth.
Right.
Yeah.
You just need to be prepared to answer to speak to the state inspector. And as for if you don't have employees to deal with it, if employees can't get to your store, state inspectors can't either. So I don't think you're going to be bothered.
Okay. I have a unit manufactured in 2006 with an oven to cook in it. Is that exempt, or all cook stoves exempt?
The EPA in 2015 created a new definition of cook stoves. You need to look at that definition in the NSPS. It had to do with the ratio of cook surface, top to oven. And it was designed to exempt traditional North American style cook stoves with large surface areas and a relatively modest size oven. So it's not, you have to, the person asking the question will just have to look at the regulation and see if they think it fits.
Yep. And on our website, not on the toolkit page, but on our general NSPS website page on our website, we do link to those definitions on that page, I believe. And if you can't find them, send me an email and I will assist you in locating them.
All right, getting down to the 5-minute warning here. I have one pending question here, and we'll see if we get a few more. Rachel, you mentioned fair market value was a term that you used, and again, not being tax professionals here. Would you consider that to be what a willing buyer would pay to a willing seller if neither were under pressure to buy or sell, or is that some other value?
I think you could say that, John. I forget how we came to that phrase, but fair market. I mean, the value you put down on what the product is worth is what you could justify to the IRS if they ever came to audit you on it.
Yeah, and your strongest case there is going to be what your costs were in it.
Yep. So market price, what you paid the distributor or manufacturer. You could.
And I should, you know, I should not have omitted the first part of that statement. Then that preceded that question. Fair market value is far more than the sum of our costs. And so then how do you determine fair market value with that calculus?
If someone wants to say to the IRS that they can donate their margin that they didn't receive, that's their choice. Personally, I wouldn't do that to the IRS. I would say, here are my costs. This is what I spent. This is what I had in it. Now you could make a case, I guess, if you've paid, if the product's been there for 3 years and sat there and you've paid interest on your loan to float it. But again, these are all questions for your tax accountant.
Yep. I also so if you Google fair market value, it is a selling price for an item to which a buyer and seller can agree. It also goes further and said the term fair market value is used throughout the Internal Revenue Code, among other federal statutory laws in the US. In litigation, many jurisdictions in the United States, the fair market value is determined at a hearing. So what can you justify to a judge?
All right. I'm not sure how far back this one goes. I did have one other question. It reads, do pellet stoves not certified follow the same rules? So I'm not sure what, you know, what year of manufacture we're talking about, but is there anything, John, on pellet stoves that?
Well, yeah, a pellet stove that's not certified is not legal to be sold, because pellet stoves, of course, have had to be certified since 2015 to be, that sell-through period was back then. If you have a pellet stove that's not certified, you're not really supposed to be selling it at all. I'd donate that real quick.
Or not donate it, just get rid of it.
Well, you can.
It's illegal to transfer ownership of something that's not certified currently.
Okay, well, that's true.
All right, and then what I think will be the last one, and this is one of the ones we have received multiple times, but I think we covered it in the first half of the presentation. Why are inserts not included in the charity donation?
Yeah, think about what's involved in installing an insert. You really need to line the chimney. Plus, these are going to go into the homes of low-income families. Many of them have old freestanding stoves. So it's both harder to install, and there are fewer families for every 100 low-income families that can use it. We've accepted, we already have 1 or 2 inserts that have been discussed with particular nonprofits, but generally speaking, we're trying not to include inserts because the nonprofits don't want to accept stoves that they can't find homes for or that they're not qualified to install.
Yep, and to add to that, not on inserts, but on other step 1 products, we've heard from one of the nonprofits, Red Feather, that they are interested in receiving up to 10 pellet stoves. I don't think that cap has been reached, but I'll bet it's going to be reached pretty soon. For the other products, it's really a case-by-case basis on furnaces and hydronic heaters, but the default is freestanding wood stoves, not pellet stoves.
All right, and with just seconds to spare here, I want to thank everybody for joining us. You see on your screens the question slide. You see Rachel's email address, John's email address, and also one for feedback. And so if you do have questions, we desperately want to answer those for you. Please reach out to Rachel or John with your questions. And if you have any feedback, good, bad, or indifferent about the presentation, we certainly welcome that as well at feedback@hpba.org. So with that, we'll bring it to a close, and we greatly appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to you in the not too distant future. Thank you.